From time to time, Valentine's Day falls on a Sunday, and it's a typical day that we can recognize marriage and love and celebrate them. In our culture, celebrating marriage carries some risks with it. In part because we tend to overlook those who are not presently married. Single folks, single parents, divorcees, widows and widowers, those for whom the skills and joys of a married life are not the same as those for those who are married. And so our purpose this day in honoring marriage is certainly not to slight those who are not in that married state. And so we want to begin by acknowledging the fact that those who are not in that married state are every inch part of this body, part of this family. And we're grateful that they are here. But in celebrating marriage, in honoring marriage, another significant question that we wrestle with and that our culture is asking more and more is whether marriage is obsolete. Is it an institution whose time has been served in the past but is no longer effective for 21st century living? Is marriage really obsolete? Seems an odd question to ask from a pulpit. There are a number of forces that drive us to ask that question. Are you familiar with the Lockhorns? This is the poster couple for what marriage ought not to be, but far too often is. He's saying to the clerk, just give her a minute, she'll think of something. This is the complaint department. Every time I read the Lockhorns, I think, yeah, this is how married life is for far too many people. We're all familiar with the Lockhorns, and people who read them identify with them very well. I want to talk for a minute about two of the influences that have driven people to ask the question, is marriage obsolete? We're going to keep that cartoon on for just a couple of minutes as a symbol of the kind of influences that make people think marriage has seen its day. The first influence I would label as the dictator. In 1898, a young couple had just gotten married, and as they were leaving the parsonage, got into the buggy, and they're heading down the road. The horse sat down in the middle of the road. The man, driving, of course, slapped the reins on the horse's back a few times. It got up, and he looked to his new bride and said, "That's one." Down the road a little further, the horse sat down again. So he pulled out the whip and cracked it a couple of times until the horse got up and moved again. And he looked at his new bride and said, "That's two." The horse sat down the third time. And this time he pulled a shotgun out of the back of the buggy, walked up and shot the horse and killed it. His wife, in utter dismay, screamed, "How could you do that? What were you thinking? That's the only horse we have. That was our future. What are we going to do without that horse?" To which he replied, "That's one." That joke is older than I am. Some of you have heard it before. But it represents what I'm labeling the dictator. The man who is absolutely in charge, perhaps because he grew up that way, but certainly not God's intent. The kind of man for whom, if it doesn't go his way, there will be, and can I use this quote, hell to pay. You will do exactly what I say, and the Bible says that you will do exactly what I say. That's one of the influences that have made people think marriage is obsolete or should be. The other influence is something that's come about more recently. In a recent message, Dr. David Jeremiah quoted an author who said that for millennia, the primary reason for getting married was financial security. The desire for children, the desire to share a life, along with attraction to another person, were parts of that motivation. But then, about 200 years ago, maybe a little longer, a shift began taking place in which love was emphasized as the basis for marriage, with a very particular meaning for the word love, and that was how I feel. How this person makes me feel. Now, that's always been part of the marriage consideration, but with this shift, now suddenly anything except a consuming passion was an unworthy motive for marriage. Love and that feeling of love that's appropriate and needs to be part of the relationship, a vital reason for marrying, now has suddenly become the focus, trying to function in a way that it was never intended to. In this process, personal happiness became the highest good. If I'm happy, this is a good marriage. If I'm not happy, then I need to get out of it. Perhaps the culmination of my pursuit of personal happiness at all costs. I won't settle for anything less than what makes me happy. Are you familiar with the term bridezilla? It's not about learning how to get along with someone and growing and becoming united. It's about what makes me happy no matter what. Someone once said, happiness is not the highest good, nor will you find happiness by seeking it. Happiness is the wondrous byproduct of giving your life to something or someone greater than yourself. So if one of the influences that makes people think that marriage is or should be obsolete is the focus on personal happiness as the greatest good, and if another influence is the dictator, these two things have one thing in common. Neither of them represents God's intent for marriage. God's intent in the church is to create a community of people whose lives reflect Him. Not just their personal preference or the prevailing culture, but Him. And that's also a very big part of His intent for marriage, to create a relationship in Him that reflects Him, not just personal preference or prevailing culture. And so we have that verse that says, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. How do we honor marriage? I'm going to share some thoughts that are not original with me. These may be things that you've practiced, things you're familiar with, but it's a good reminder because they've got a good biblical basis. First, esteem your marriage as highly valuable. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He was talking about money, but we can apply that principle to say if this marriage is important, if you're going to honor it, then invest in it. It doesn't happen when it's convenient or by itself. Esteem your marriage as highly valuable. Invest in it. Value your spouse by seeing him or her as personally autographed by God. I like that picture. Not only your marriage, but esteem every marriage as valuable, thinking of it as a duet in need of great backup singers. Who was your favorite group that had backup singers? Am I allowed to say that in church? Anybody else? You have a favorite group that had backup singers? What would Gladys Knight be without the Pips? Just Gladys. I'm going to go back to the Song of Solomon for just a moment. This strange book that is often overlooked and can sometimes be hard to find. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. It celebrates the wonder of genuine intimacy on every level between a husband and wife. There was a time when Orthodox rabbis would not allow young men to read this book until they were at least 33 years of age. We don't look at it much. It does reflect the relationship between Christ and his church, but it was designed to reflect the relationship between husband and wife. And one of the things that this couple, this book, is a conversation between a lover and his beloved. And throughout, there are things inserted that are said by friends. The two will talk to each other for a time, and then this thing from friends. And in chapter 1, verse 4 is the first thing we see by these friends. We will exult and rejoice in you. We will extol your love more than wine. These friends are the backup singers, the people who encourage this couple in their relationship. Every good duet needs these kind of backup singers, those friends who will encourage that marriage relationship. As you're esteeming your own relationship and as you're serving as an encourager to other relationships, in the process, I want to show us how we can honor marriage. First, those of you who have married children, this is particularly appropriate. Those who are looking for the day when they will be married, honor your adult child's marriage by separating from him or her relationally, emotionally, and financially. God's intent, and he said this through Adam, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. It doesn't mean that mom and dad are not out of the picture. It means that now this is the priority relationship. Mom and dad need to be available and standing by. The day of a particular wedding, the mother of the groom approached the pastor and said, "How dare you tell my son to stop loving his mother?" And the pastor smiled and said, "I think you must have misunderstood something I said. I told your son it would be well for him not to call you every day." this new relationship, the way this new relationship is honored, is by parents who are available, but requiring this marriage to become its own entity. Parents bless the marriages of their children by preparing them for the responsibility of work and marriage, and then releasing them into their new home to start their own family. You're available, but you're keeping separate. 2, honor newlyweds and seasoned couples by encouraging quality couple time. Back in the Song of Solomon, the beloved says to his love, "Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away." Do you remember the days when there was no time because the kids, everything was so busy? We can honor marriages by helping them take time for each other, whatever that takes. And it can be simple things. A daily delay, just that 15 or 20 minutes when they are free from kids and free from phones and free from distraction and can focus on each other. That's something that they need to focus on. A weekly withdrawal, a date night. But plan it ahead, because I can tell you, we can tell you from personal experience, there is no time for it. You have to schedule it, plan it, prepare it, do it, and do it regularly. An annual abandon, once a year. Take some serious time to be just the two of you and get away. Encourage quality couple time is one way to honor newlyweds and couples. 3rd, honor couples in crisis by advocating for both spouses, not just one. In the Song of Solomon, chapter 6, these two who are so delighted with each other have had a spat. They've had a fight. They've had an argument of some kind. And he's walked away. Not intending to leave, but he's just frustrated, angry, furious. He's cooling off a little bit. And she realizes, oh man, I can't let it stay this way. But she has help. Along the way, this woman, looking for her husband to make this right, runs into some of her backup singers, friends who have been supporting and encouraging. And they are relentless in their encouragement of the marriage. Where has your beloved gone, O most beautiful among women? Where has your beloved turned so that we may seek him with you? Notice that they don't say, he really is a jerk. Nor would they say to him, had she walked away, I don't know why you put up with her. They do not say those kinds of things because their support is not for her against him or him against her. Their support is for the two of them, the marriage. They're about reconciling each other. Honor couples in crisis by advocating for both spouses, not just one. And 4th, honor senior couples by recognizing their commitment and following their example. I'm going to ask, if you've been married for more than 25 years, would you stand? That is probably an unusual sight in much of the United States today. So on behalf of every couple who is starting out or struggling, I want to say to you, thank you. This is going to be a difficult question to ask, and I don't want you to answer it out loud, but this question I will put to you. Was it worth it? I know, it depends on what day you ask, right? We honor you, not because you've done it perfectly, but because you've done it. And perhaps your marriage is not the poster child for what ought to be. Maybe you are Lockhorns, but the fact is, you're doing it. And you're showing that one day it will be worth it. Thank you. You may be seated. I could poll the couples that just stood and ask them, what is your secret for staying together for so long? And we could come up with a whole host of answers. Sometimes people will respond, I found my soulmate. I was fortunate enough to find my soulmate the first time around. Dating sites will encourage you to look for someone who is compatible with you. Often we simply say, we're in love. We've never stopped being in love. All those things will have a role in married life, but the real answer is your character. Commitment in marriage flows from character. And character always trumps compatibility. The reality is, nobody's compatible 100%. If you haven't found that yet, I want to talk to you because you've got a relationship that nobody else has. Character trumps relationship, trumps compatibility. Solomon reminds us, Solomon was the one who wrote that passionate love poem. But then in one of his more morose moments, he said, in the book of Ecclesiastes, enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Solomon's focus was what happens on this world, and he wasn't really looking at God intervening. But the fact is, God does intervene with every marriage that's committed to him. We are so glad that you are here today. We want you to know that your duet is an important part of this church. We want to be backup singers for you. We want to honor marriage because your marriage is important to your spouse and to your children and to your parents and to your friends and to the community and to this church. And our prayer is that your marriage will thrive and that the gospel of Jesus will be proclaimed through it. I pray that today, like the kids that I challenged today, you will leave here with at least one couple in mind and in a tangible way, honor their marriage. Don't put it off. Make a call, send a text, invite for coffee, invite for dinner. Take a step and honor a marriage. Pray with me.